Ethan had always been a meticulous planner. Originally from Chicago, he was now in his final year of medical school in San Francisco. The weight of exams, rotations, and endless study sessions pressed down on him. So when he received an invitation to a medical conference in Los Angeles, it felt like a much-needed escape. He had no family left in Chicago, both parents having passed when he was young. Raised by a loving aunt, she had been his bedrock. He was deeply invested in becoming a doctor, not just for himself, but to honor her sacrifices. So a trip to LA was not just about the conference, it was also a chance for him to catch up with a few old friends. After comparing hotel prices, Ethan decided to book a duplex in a quiet suburb on Airbnb. The photos showed a well-maintained property with clean rooms, modern amenities, and a decent price. The reviews, too, were mostly positive, praising the cleanliness and comfort. The only odd thing was that the host, a man named Martin, had a peculiar rule: do not access the basement. Ethan arrived in LA on a sunny afternoon. The duplex was located in a peaceful neighborhood, surrounded by tall pine trees, casting eerie, long shadows on the quiet streets. The home itself was two-storied, painted a crisp white, with a meticulously maintained garden. He rang the doorbell, and after a short wait, the door creaked open. A tall, lanky man with salt and pepper hair and deep-set, piercing eyes greeted him. "You must be Ethan," he said, in a voice as cold as winter's night. "I'm Martin." The initial encounter was slightly off-putting. Martin's handshake was clammy, and his constant gaze made Ethan uneasy. As Ethan settled into his room, he heard Martin whispering to someone. He couldn't make out the words, but it sounded tense. Shrugging it off, Ethan decided to get some rest. The next day, after attending the conference, Ethan returned to find a note on his bed. Remember, no going downstairs. It was strange, but Ethan had no intentions of breaking any house rules. However, curiosity grew as he heard sounds from the basement at night: whispers, footsteps, the sound of metal dragging. One evening, after a day of back-to-back sessions, Ethan returned to the duplex utterly exhausted. As he entered, the front door slammed shut behind him. The lights flickered. He felt a chill in the air. Realizing he forgot his conference materials in the car, Ethan tried to exit, but the door wouldn't budge. He felt trapped. Panic set in. He tried calling out to Martin, but there was no answer. He then tried his phone, but there was no signal. The sounds from the basement grew louder. An eerie tune played on an old piano, joined by soft weeping. Ethan's heart raced. With his back against the front door, he surveyed the home, searching for another way out. He remembered a back door from the kitchen. As he approached the kitchen, he noticed photographs lining the hallway. They showed various guests, presumably previous renters. But what caught his attention was the most recent photo. It was of him, taken unknowingly while he was at the conference. The paranoia heightened, and Ethan felt a shiver down his spine. In the kitchen, Ethan tried the back door, locked. Frustration and fear consumed him. The whispers grew louder, more persistent. Curiosity now combined with desperation. He needed to know what was in the basement. Approaching the door, he heard Martin's voice. "They always try to leave. They always come down." He cautiously opened the door. Down the rickety stairs, he saw a dimly lit room. Old furnishings, layers of dust, and in the center, a grand piano playing by itself. To the side stood Martin, talking to the walls. "See, they always come, just like you said." Ethan, voice trembling, spoke up. "Martin, why am I locked in? What's going on?" Martin, eyes wide and filled with tears, replied, "They tell me things. Whispers in the walls. They said you come down. They say they're trapped, just like you." Realization dawned on Ethan. Martin was suffering from extreme paranoia, likely caused by profound isolation. The duplex, with its thick walls and quiet surroundings, amplified every little noise, leading Martin to believe he was hearing whispers. "I just want to leave, Martin. Please let me out," Ethan pleaded, trying to approach the situation with empathy. Martin hesitated, then spoke with a quivering voice. "I can't. They won't let me." The standoff felt like an eternity. Ethan took a deep breath and said, "Martin, these whispers are not real. They're echoes, amplifications. I promise." The next few moments were tense. Martin's eyes darted around, torn between the conviction in Ethan's words and the perceived whispers from the walls. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the living room. Both men jumped. Racing upstairs, they found the front door open, wind howling outside. A tree branch had smashed through a window, unlatching the door in the process. Seizing the opportunity, Ethan bolted outside, breathing the fresh air and feeling the weight lift off his shoulders. Behind him, Martin stood in the doorway, a lost soul, consumed by the whispers in his mind. Ethan later reported the incident to Airbnb and urged them to get Martin some help. He checked into a hotel for the rest of his stay. Weeks after returning to San Francisco, Ethan received a handwritten letter. It was from Martin. The man had sought psychiatric help and was in therapy, battling his inner demons. The letter was filled with apologies, gratitude, and hope. Mark's life had become painfully predictable. A tech guru with a sprawling house in Silicon Valley and a job that sent him across the globe, he still felt an emptiness that his success couldn't fill. Divorced for 2 years and disconnected from his teenage son, Mark needed an escape from his pristine, microchipped life. His therapist had recommended he take a break, get away from the screens and the relentless beep of notifications. On a whim, Mark booked a cozy little cottage in the woods, advertised on Airbnb. The photos showcased a rustic haven, wooden beams, a roaring fireplace, and large windows that opened to a dense, green canopy. It seemed like the perfect place to unplug. Mark arrived just as the evening fog began to roll in, the temperature a chilly embrace against his skin. The woods sang a chorus of nighttime creatures, their calls echoing through the tall trees. He admired the quaint charm of the cottage from outside. The online pictures had done it justice. The first evening was sheer bliss. Mark enjoyed a hearty meal, read a paperback, and allowed the weight of his stressful life to melt away. It was only as he prepared for bed that he noticed something odd, the faintest red light blinking beneath the television stand. Intrigued, he knelt down to inspect it. To his surprise, Mark discovered a hidden camera, its lens pointing directly at the couch where he had been lounging. Panic bubbled in his chest. He swiftly checked the rest of the living area. In the corners, cleverly disguised as innocuous objects, were more cameras. The realization struck him with a cold jolt. Someone had been watching. Shaken, Mark decided to use his tech savvy to find out just how deep the rabbit hole went. Scanning for network signals, he found a hidden Wi-Fi network emitting from somewhere within the property. He connected and was led to a series of live feeds, each showcasing different parts of the cottage. In one feed, Mark could see himself, a live broadcast from the bedroom camera. In another, he saw the bathroom, the shower still glistening from his use. The creepiness escalated when he stumbled upon feeds from previous guests, families with children, couples on romantic getaways, all recorded without their knowledge. Its initial panic evolved into sheer terror as he unearthed archive footage, some months old, some years. They were organized by guest names and dates. And worst of all, some files, labeled special, showcased guests in their most private moments, with zoom-ins, edits, and chillingly voyeuristic angles. By now, Mark was desperate to leave, but his car keys, which he distinctly remembered placing on the kitchen counter, were missing. Desperate, he decided to message the landlord through the Airbnb app, feigning ignorance about the cameras. "Hey there, I seem to have misplaced my car keys. I can't seem to find them. Would you have any idea?" The reply came almost instantaneously. "Why don't you check behind the television stand? Sometimes things get lost there." The message sent a wave of dread through Mark. The landlord knew. He knew about the camera Mark had found. In a burst of adrenaline-fueled energy, Mark began formulating a plan. First, he disabled the cameras in the main living areas. Then, using his technical expertise, he managed to reverse hack the Wi-Fi feed. Through it, he discovered that the live streams were being sent to another location nearby. Gathering his courage, he decided to venture outside. The woods had taken on a menacing aura. Every whisper of the wind sounded like a concealed whisper, every rustle like a stealthy footstep. Guided only by the signal strength on his device, Mark trudged deeper into the woods. After what felt like hours, he stumbled upon a concealed cabin, slightly smaller than the cottage he had rented. Peering through a window, he saw walls lined with screens broadcasting live feeds from various rentals, not just his cottage. A rotund man, presumably the landlord, sat engrossed, headphones on, scribbling notes as he watched. Steeling himself, Mark smashed the window with a rock. The landlord, caught off guard, stumbled backward, knocking over a shelf. Amidst the chaos, Mark saw photos, hundreds of them, of different guests, including a freshly printed one of himself. The two men locked eyes, the atmosphere thick with tension. Mark's survival instincts kicked in. "Why?" he demanded, struggling to keep his voice steady. The landlord sneered, "People pay big money for these special films. It's a thriving business." In the ensuing scuffle, Mark managed to pin down the landlord, using zip ties he always carried in his tech bag to bind him. Gasping for breath, he called the police, who arrived promptly and took the landlord into custody. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The news of the criminal landlord's voyeuristic enterprise made headlines. Mark was both lauded for his bravery and pitied for his victimhood. Lawsuits were filed, other victims came forward, and Airbnb faced severe scrutiny. But for Mark, the experience became a turning point. He sought therapy to process the trauma, reconnected with his estranged son, sharing his experience to ensure his safety in an increasingly digital age, and even started an NGO focused on digital privacy and safety. As time passed and the horror faded to memory, Mark often reflected on the twisted irony. The very technology he had sought to escape had ensnared him in its most sinister trap, but it had also been his salvation. Still, whenever he checked into a hotel or rental, the first thing he did was scan for hidden cameras, a haunting reminder of the night the woods washed back. Paul Layton had always been on the fringe of Hollywood's A-list. Never the lead in blockbusters, but he had played substantial roles in a few critically acclaimed movies. His face was just recognizable enough that a keen fan might stop him on the street for an autograph. It was in pursuit of one such meaty role that he found himself in San Francisco for a week. The audition process required him to stay in the city longer than he'd liked, but he considered it a necessary inconvenience. It was a psychological thriller, the role of a lifetime. Opting for privacy over luxury, Paul rented a modern condo through Airbnb in the Chick-Soma neighborhood. Upon arrival, he was greeted by his host, Graham, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair, wearing glasses that seemed to intensify his gaze. "Mr. Layton, I'm such a fan. Loved you in dark whispers. Welcome to my home," Graham beamed. "Thank you," Paul murmured, trying to hide his surprise. He had hoped for an anonymous trip, free from fan interactions, especially at his temporary residence. The condo was a marvel of modern design, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the urban sprawl, minimalist furnishings, and a state-of-the-art entertainment system. While settling in, Paul's phone buzzed. A text from Graham. "If you need company, I'm free to join for dinner or sightseeing." Paul hesitated before responding. "Thanks, Graham. Might take a rain check on that. Here mostly for business." He thought that would be the end of it. He was wrong. The next morning, Paul decided to visit the Golden Gate Park. As he exited the building, Graham, as if materializing from the shadows, greeted him. "Fancy seeing you here. Heading out?" Paul, taken aback, nodded. "Just a walk. Thought I'd enjoy the park." "I'll join you," Graham said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Not wanting to be impolite, Paul hesitated, then replied, "Sure, why not?" They walked in mostly silence, Graham occasionally pointing out landmarks or trivia about the city. Paul felt Graham's gaze heavy on him, scrutinizing, observing. It was suffocating. Paul tried to evade Graham over the next few days, but it was as if the man had a sixth sense. Coffee at a cafe in the Mission District. Graham was already there, reading a paper. Visits at Alcatraz. Graham magically had tickets for the same slot. By the fourth day, Paul's paranoia grew. Was Graham stalking him? He decided to confront him. Paul texted Graham, "Appreciate your company, but would like some time alone. Hope you understand." Minutes later, There was a knock on the condo door. Graham stood there, face red, veins protruding from his neck. "You think you're better than me?" he spat out, voice trembling with rage. Paul stepped back, shocked by this sudden aggression. "No, Graham, I just need some privacy. You rent my home, eat in my city, and then want me gone? Ungrateful." With that, Graham stormed off, leaving Paul shaken. Paul's audition was the next day. He decided he'd check into a hotel after and avoid any further contact with Graham. But the next day, when Paul returned from the audition, he found his belongings strewn across the condo. His passport gone. His phone smashed. A note lay on the coffee table. "No one rejects Graham." Terrified, Paul raced to the nearest police station. They took his statement and sent an officer to the condo. Graham was gone. Paul was advised to leave the city and they'd handle the matter. That night, Paul checked into a hotel downtown, using an alias. The weight on his chest seemed to lift a little. Maybe he had overreacted. Maybe Graham was just a disgruntled, lonely man, and it was all a misunderstanding. Around midnight, while drifting into sleep, Paul's room phone rang. Groggy, he answered. There was a moment of silence, then the unmistakable voice sent chills down Paul's spine. "You can't hide from me, Paul." Paul panicked. He grabbed a few essentials and fled the hotel. He rented a car, intending to drive to the A and escape the nightmare. As he sped down the highway, Paul's eyes darted around, expecting Graham at every turn. Paranoia had taken hold. Every car seemed to be tailing him, every shadow a lurking menace. Hours into the drive, his tired eyes caught a glint in the rearview mirror. A car, its headlights off, was tailing him closely. Paul's heart raced. He floored the accelerator, the roads a blur, the dark silhouette of the pursuer relentless. A sharp bend approached. Paul, in his exhaustion and panic, miscalculated. Tires screeched. Metal screamed. The world turned upside down. Morning light revealed a wrecked car in a ditch. Locals who arrived on the scene found Paul unconscious but alive. There was no sign of any other vehicle. The news about Paul's accident spread. The investigation showed that there was no evidence of another car or foul play. It was deemed an unfortunate accident due to exhaustion. Weeks later, as Paul recuperated in a hospital in Leh, a bouquet arrived with a note. "Get well soon, dear Paul. We had fun in San Francisco, didn't we?" Graham. The truth of that night on the highway remained a mystery. Had Graham really been there, or had paranoia and fear conjured an imaginary pursuer? Paul never returned to San Francisco. But every shadow, every unexpected phone call, every knock at the door kept the memory and fear of Graham alive. In the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, Paul Layton had faced many foes on screen, but none would ever be as terrifying as the specter of Graham, the silent observer,